We good to go? All right, everybody. Evening, everybody. Thank you all for showing up. My name is John Stofker. Tonight, I'm going to be giving a talk on how to actualize and weaponize your application delivery controllers and start talking about active defense. This is who I am. It's my Twitter handle. Currently, I work as a security architect for a large consulting firm that is going through a midlife crisis and changing their name. So we put the old name up there because we don't really know what the new name is yet. Yes, but we have to decide how to spell it. I have all the right letters after my name. I didn't put them up here because they last. We all have them. We all understand. So what are we doing here? Why are we here today? In my travels as a consultant and in doing this for a long time, I've realized that our security teams now are being tasked with taking on devices that they were never before taking on. They're looking at application load balancers, delivery controllers, and such that. And I found that a lot of them think of them as little foreign objects that aren't really fun to play, or they just don't know. Our defensive capabilities are a lot of detect and report, and we just kind of take on all that information. We write up these pretty reports, and then we sit down and we don't know what to do with it from then. So about 2 years ago, a fellow researcher, Matt Hoy, and I sat down and we started looking real into active defense. The idea of taking all that information that we have gathered from these reports and doing something with it, doing something about it. Because defense can be fun. And if you have detection, you have all this reporting, but you don't do anything about it, you've wasted your time. What can you say at the end of the day? You have 10 terabytes of logs about what happened. You can tell a story about what happened, but you did nothing about it. So you did nothing to stop it from happening again. So let's talk. We're going to go through a little bit of background on active defense, what it is, how it is defined, and then we'll walk into our application delivery controllers and how we can use those to start pushing a small sense of active defense into our applications. So let's talk about active defense. Here's the official textbook definition. Notice it's the employment of limited offensive action. We're not saying go full guns to the wall and go out and just go guns blazing at whoever's attacking you. The idea is that you make your strikes targeted, you make them surgical. You understand who your enemy is, you adapt your response to their action appropriately. Obviously, if you can assess the enemy as someone who has far greater resources than you may not want to engage. And as we go through the talk today, I can kind of point out where you draw the line in whether you actually want to pursue this or just back off and find some other way to remediate your issue. Currently, the U.S. government is actually looking into active defense as part of their cybersecurity strategy underneath the Army. The private sector obviously has interest in it. We don't really have common definitions other than that one textbook when I showed you. Agora recently met and they drew up kind of a framework around it. But everybody has kind of their own idea of what to do, what constitutes active defense. When do you strike back? Is it legal? That is a huge debate right now. Is it legal to then take advantage and weaponize yourself against someone who is attacking you? We understand the ramifications in the physical sense. There are certain laws and kind of legalities around if someone approaches you and it costs you what you can do back. But in this sense, when it's another entity attacking you, attacking your computers, your systems, your way of doing business, how far do you go? What is your runway to deal with that? There's no case law, there's no precedent, it's really uncharted area. So above all else, before we get into anything else, I will say, before you do anything in this slide deck, consult your legal teams to make sure it's okay to do so. Utah Senator Orrin Hatch had this to say in a congressional hearing. I pointed out the most interesting part of this. Now that's working. No, you can't see it. The part in red, he's actually coming out and saying before Congress, hey, if we can't do it the right way, and if what we do happens to blow up their stuff, well, let's go blow up their stuff. It's interesting not many people caught on to this in those proceedings. It was about 700 pages of really dry reading, and out of that was the only thing I came up with, and I almost spit out my coffee. It was funny. But it's true, right? If this is the way our government is taking towards this, then we can model our businesses after this and go right along with what the government is doing so that we can stay within the gray shades of the black and white. So what is our role in active defense? I'm going to take some time right now to go through a little primer to bring everybody up to speed on where we're at in terms of information security and information awareness. Because it's important to understand how this all fits in before we start talking about how we're going to play with different technologies. And if my clicker would work, there we go. We all know what information assurance is, right? I mean, this is what we do day in, day out. We protect and we defend, right? Do we also know that in that definition, we do have the capability to react? Currently today, our reactions are literally, writing reports, submitting them to somebody, calling in some other third party to come in and verify that what we saw was what we saw. They rub their magic 8-ball and come up with attribution, and they can say, hey, China did it, and then we walk away. We may go back and patch, right? We may go back and remediate ourselves, make sure that the likelihood of this happening again doesn't stop, but we never take any other stance. Up until now, our current way of reacting is just to, as I call the AT&T moment, where you just pick up the phone, you call the leading cybersecurity experts, and they come in and you never hear about it again. So these are some common strategic attacks that happened, right? I mean, obviously for some of you this is old hat, but it's interesting to understand that violation of copyright is considered an attack, stepping stones, pivot and layer. These are all what we day to day are fending off against. Here's some more of your tactical attacks, right? I mean, again, these are just really cut and dry. It's taking the idea of what the enemy wants to get out of us, their strategy, and now these are the tactical methods they use to do it. And this is obviously how our current setup is today. You've got your attackers up there. They usually go through some sort of middleman down to the agents, which are usually unsuspecting people. It's no longer today is it that Joe guy in Russia is actually physically hitting you himself. He's gotten smarter. He's laid himself out to millions of different zombies out there. So the person or the agent actually attacking you may not be your attacker. It may be some foreign, innocent bystander that just happened to get caught up in the mix of it. And cats are always cool attackers. So what do our strategic defenses look like today? I mean, we have firewalls, we have IDSs. If you notice, most of these are very passive devices. They're very collective devices. They're not doing anything to stop the attacker. They are just, observe and report. Your firewall may be blocking ports, great, but it's not as if it's actually giving you any more intelligence about what's happening. And here are some of our tactical defense mechanisms. Obviously, we go through all these things. Again, a lot of this is, right, it is observe and report. So what about how do attacks affect us? In this case, this would be like a small, medium business where they get attacked and they're losing money day in, day out because they don't know what's happening. And this creates a monetary drain on the company that is pervasive. It spans many months, and they don't realize what's happening because they can't see it. It could be a piece of malware on their POS because they use that same POS system to check their email as they do to run their batch files every night, and they're siphoning off 100, 200,000 each week. Business never sees it, and so this line just keeps going up. Cross that with the large attacks over a small period of time. This would be your average broker attack, where you're taking the compensation or the commissions off brokers over a short period of time, but you're getting in and you're pulling out that big chunk of change and you're getting away with it. And here's how we put it all together. This slide represents the attack, how long they take, what their usual time frame is, whether they are a slow and low, where we're just bleeding people out one by one, or if it's a fast, take everything and run. It's important to understand that these two that I've highlighted in bold, the availability of services data and the unauthorized use of resources, are ones where we can interject ourselves and react, right? I mean, these are places where we have something that we can do to not only stop it, but to launch some other countermeasure. We really can't do much if our client information is leaked. There's no way we can go after that, right? Once it's out there, it's gone. You can't unring that bell. It just stops. Integrity of financial data systems, there's not much we can do there. Once the integrity is breached, we can go after the people who did it, but we can always assume that that information is lost. But when we're looking at the availability of services and data and the unauthorized use of resources, this right here is your DDoS, and below it we have our common malware. That is something we can do something about. We can launch an offensive because these are things that can stop immediately, and then we can turn around and use to take out our opponents. So what is the reactive model in this whole thing? Well, falling over here. We have the unconscious reaction. So we consider this to be root B, or right out of the box. This is when you first get a box or a system, or you bring it up online, it is in the default state. Nothing's been done to it, right? It's green tree, it's fresh out. Sadly, a lot of companies will take this model and just throw it right in. That is their production ready, go to work, do nothing. Most people can sit in stage 1, which is I've hardened it, I've done my due diligence to make sure that this box is ready for battle when I put it into the rack. Stage 2 of interactive response. This is the oh shit moment. This is the moment you get the email, you get the alert, you get some sort of thing saying, hey, something has happened, you need to react now. So that's stage 2 of response. Stage 3. This is when you reach out and you call that industry-leading expert to help you come in and figure out what happened. They have to assign the attribution. They have to tell you, what went on, or at least certify what you already know. What went on, happened, where it went, what was affected, how do you clean up the mess? Let's go to stage 4. I like to call it switching to guns. This is where you take everything that leading person told you, and now you find some way to operationalize and to use that for your advantage. Whether it means taking that information, finding the responsible party in the physical space and taking advantage there, or identifying the target and launching some sort of countermeasure. This is taking, where we used to stop at stage 3 and say, okay, great, we got the report, we're going to go off and do other stuff. Now we're taking it to the next step. Stage 4 has four parts. The first one is recon. It's important, probably the most important part. We need to know who our attacker is, who our enemy is. Recon can take everything from raw text reports down to going through, if it's pervasive, if it's a DDoS attack, we're going to go look through the WHOIS database, figure out what networks they're coming from. The idea behind the recon is to assess their ability. What do they have available to them? Are they a nation state? Do they have all the resources of a nation state? Are they, a pissed off former employee that's sitting at home? What is their capability, and how do I defend against what might happen? Actually, go back. The second one, 4.2, is the non-cooperative cease and desist. This is when you actually tell them, or if you figure out who they are, you send a letter, or you call them up on the phone and say, hey, man, stop it. Do the chivalrous thing, give them an out. They could hang up the phone on you, they could laugh at you, and that's fine. But you've got to give them that out. You've got to make that first contact, say, hey, I know what you're doing. Just put it away, stop it, let's go. If you can't find a way to contact them, then we go to 4.3 is counteroffense. This is where you actually launch your counteroffense. You launch whatever it is you're going to do to make sure that they cease what they're doing and you can go on with business. 4.4 is what we're going to be talking about today, and it's kind of the outlier. It's preemptive defense. This is where you aren't taking an active stance of defending, but you are sitting there waiting that when something happens, you have an immediate response to it. Things to ponder. And these, if you're thinking about going down active defense, you should write these down in the first page of your incident notebook to read over when you walk down this path, because it's one of those journeys that you really can't turn around from. Once you start this ball rolling, you can't unring you can't step out and say, hey man, time out, I was just kidding. I mean, it is a process that goes on till the end. So the first one, and this is one for everybody to really think about, is, are your losses really worth the risk? Is what you're losing today worth the risk of what could happen if this all goes sideways? And who was it? And do you know? Do you know who it was? Do you really have a good idea of who it was? Because without knowing, you're firing blind into the night. And then what are you going to do? Have a plan as to what you really plan on doing. What do you expect to achieve on the end game? Is it to shut them down? Is it to obliterate them? Currently, right now, the RIAA is going after Cloudflare because they let a music sharing site back online, and they want to shut them down. They didn't go after the company. They tried suing them. That didn't work. So they went after their provider. It's a roundabout way of getting to their end. And then the last one is, what do you expect the blowback to be? If they do have capabilities, are you willing to take on and poke that bear? What is your personal risk? Not just organizational risk, what is your personal risk? Are all your affairs in order? Can you make sure that they can't provide those same OPSEC and dossier building utilities on you? Can they go and find your information? And are you prepared to enter that battle? Because it could get ugly. Is your full profile on LinkedIn? So if I can go look and find you and trace you back to where you're at. Realize that when you start into these things, it can get personal, it can get scary. But it goes back to that first question: is it worth the risk to your business? Who are you going to call? Who's going to be your backup? Who's going to be your mentor? Who's going to help you out with this? You can't do it alone. You're going to need somebody else. You're going to need someone to bounce ideas off of. Then it goes back to who and what is the target and how do you know? We keep asking that question over and over again because you got to be really sure of the evidence you've gathered. It can't be some really flaky, shaky evidence that just points to some giant nation. It has to be specific. It has to be something you can actualize. And then who defines in your organization what active defense means? Does it come from the low-end engineers, analysts, or does it come from up higher in the food chain? And the last one, the one you always want to think about, is there another way to do this? Is there another way to achieve this ends? So let's look at our defenses. I take the example of our web application stacks because they're most prevalent today. They're in everywhere, and they usually comprise the same core sets of things. You have your ADCs, your web servers, which are your front and back, and your database server. So what is an application delivery controller? Anybody want to answer that? I got the answer right up here. It literally is a giant reverse proxy. Of everything it does, it ends the communication with the client, starts up another communication with your server in the back end, and just pulls the two tubes together. And it holds it there. What's interesting about this is that you have effectively created a man in the middle. And with what I've been seeing in the enterprise, more security teams are having to take over these boxes because they purchase WAFs. And the WAF is built into it, and we see the WAF as a security device, so we give it to the security team, and they're like, well, you take the whole device. Most guys I talk to are like, well, the load balancer, that's like a switch, it's an IT thing. But if you think about it in terms of our context, it is an authorized man in the middle. We all know what we can do with a man in the middle. We can have some really fun times with it. So let's take those ideas and get rid of the word ADC and just put in man in the middle and see what we can come up with. The interesting thing about most ADCs is they not only operate at layer 3 and 4, which is fun, but they also operate at layer 7. Understand that we have the full availability to look at everything inside the protocol to make some sort of decision about that traffic. So we're not just relying on IP addresses and ports, but for some of them we can actually get down into looking at different ways the application is being accessed. So here's a slide. I got it from a vendor, but it was probably the best one that explains everything. I'm sorry, it does not mean that this vendor actually has anything to do with it. But as you can see, we have our ADCs in layer 4 through 7, as well as sitting straddling between 2 and 3. It's an interesting place to be because, again, we actually have a device under our control that can speak the protocol to the client, that the clients trust, right? Client thinks it's actually connecting to your web page. You're actually connecting to a box you own that can then decide what they want to do with it. So what is reverse proxy? As I explained before, most of us understand the idea that the client connection comes in, we stop it, we create another one on the back end. We are brokering in between. Kind of looks like this. So the thing to take out of this slide is the bottom one. Most of our commercial ADCs out there have some sort of scripting interface. So now I've built for you a legal man in the middle that the client trusts. We can use the protocol to gain information about it. And we have a scripting interface to do something. I mean, this is probably the funnest toy that we've now got, because if we can find some way to detect bad clients from good clients, we can have fun, right? So as I said before, we have a client that they're willingly connecting to us. These people, these bots, these scripts, this malware, they're willingly connecting to us under the guise that they want us to think that they're a client. They don't realize that what they've actually got is a security device in front of the application that now is armed to do something. So let's go back to our responses. 4.4, preemptive defense. Let's start thinking about what sorts of things that we can do in a matter of preemptive defense when we have a man in the middle that we control, that our clients are willfully connecting to. let's go back to security but through obscurity. Jean's maxim was that we should create systems that if they were compromised, would be so public that if they were compromised, any attacker would be able to use them. Anyone want to take a gander as to why this is important? Anybody? The idea is that if everybody knows about our systems and it's so public and so pervasive that any idiot would be an expert on it, then there's no surprises. There's no hidden backdoors that some developer put in because he was lazy one night. You leave everything out on the table. You open the kimono, you share everything. The same analogy goes to a principle in cryptography where it should be that the algorithm itself should be secure enough that absent the private key, you shouldn't be able to decode anything. Same with systems. Absent what makes your system unique to you and is your proprietary data, the rest of the system should be open. Problem is we don't do this. We like to keep everything tight and not public, but we will advertise what we're running. So we won't post our source code out there, but I'll tell the whole world that I'm running PHP. I'll tell the whole world that I'm running Nginx. We tend to give up a lot of information about our infrastructure. A lot. And a lot of it was because back in the day, Netcraft ran these surveys where it told you how many Apache boxes were out on the internet, and we wanted to be part of that. Some marketing guy said, we have to keep the banners on. SendMail wouldn't work if you turned the banners off. Well, this was just all the devices I found on Shodan that were running PHP 5.3.3, which, among other things, suffers from a CVE from 2006. The CVE is almost 9 years old. And 45,000. If tomorrow we decided just to get rid of all of our banners, Shodan would cease to exist. I couldn't find that information in 2.5 minutes. And if I can find it in 2.5 minutes, your attacker can find it in less. We've really lowered the bar. I mean, attackers today don't even have to be smart. And then our so-called pen testers who do a banner grab and then throw your report, they don't have to be smart either. And the people in who are laughing, it's because you've gotten one of those. I mean, it's trivial to go pull banners, go to Vuln Hub, say, hey, I found it, boom, you're done. Or even Metasploit does it for you today. So why are we giving away so much stuff? Well, partially because we've been convinced that if we don't, something's going to break. Developers will always tell you, well, if you turn that off, my application will break. Well, have you tested it? Well, no. So we really don't know, but that's what we've been told. Most people don't know that a lot of the applications out there have settings to turn these things off. You can configure Apache Nginx to shut off banners. Problem we have as security guys is that's not our purview. That is not our realm. We go talk to them, give them suggestions. They just look at us and go, yeah, that's nice. Go back over there with your firewall and behave. So let's go back to what we own now. We own a man in the middle that we control, that's scriptable, that the client trusts, that the guys who run the web server, they have nothing, they can't touch us, right? So what if we just stopped giving away this information? What if we stopped handing out what we're running and just supplied whatever we wanted to run? So I'll go back to a picture of a common web stack, right? We know how this works. The request goes out, passes through your WAF to your ADC, back in all that place where all the fun stuff happens, comes back out to the client. What I'm going to go over is technique. Nothing here is magic. Nothing here is super cool. The choice in languages I gave you were just because it was easy for me to come up with. But it doesn't mean that you have to use these technologies. But think of the tactics we're using and see what you can come up with. So let's try to remove identifying headers. I don't know if any of you have read the HTTP spec. Doesn't require any headers at all. It is only the applications that we use that supply them, and it's quite trivial to turn them off. The issue comes down to there are some applications that are custom built that require certain things to be there. It is a good idea to work with your developers to make sure that you are passing the correct things, but you don't have to send a server banner. You don't have to identify yourself to the rest of the world. So in F5, we can create a simple iRule. It is literally one line. It's that line right there. In this case, all I'm throwing back is content type and connection. The reason we had to throw back connection is the F5 actually had a bug where if you didn't, it would hang open and it would never close, and your box would run out of memory. But ideally, in a perfect world, you wouldn't have to return anything. In Apache, mod headers, you literally, it's 2 lines, done. You've now taken your box and completely removed any identifying information. So if someone were to scan it, they could not figure out what you were. Even better is replace it with something else. Replace it with a valid header from Microsoft or a script that rotates them randomly. So every time you scan it, you're getting a different. I mean, it's fun for the Nessus guys because they load up that scan and it's like, oh look, you've got you're running IS8. Well, that's nice. It's a Raspberry Pi, but hey, that's what scanners give you. I don't know if many people know, every web server out there sends back headers in a different way. And OWASP has done a great job of actually going out and categorizing this all for you. I didn't realize until I started doing research on this project that everything is different, and sure enough, I went through and I looked at them, and they do order them in certain specific orders every time, but they're all different. So what if you had a way in your ADC, which you own now, you control, just to reorder your headers randomly? You would throw off a lot of these applications that profile. Nmap uses this to profile your web server if it doesn't get a banner. If it doesn't get a successful server banner, it will go through and look at the way you're sending out your headers to determine, at least with a little bit of accuracy, what you're running. So you can use Apache mod headers or Nginx. You can use your ADC. Most of these things you can do at this end. You can also do it at the web server, but I'm going on the assumption that most of you guys don't have direct access to your web servers. That's why we have to go a level up. So yeah, Sleepy Kitty just told me that was yawn. So what else can we do? Anyone want to do some client-side fun? So one thing I learned throughout this research is that people who write malicious software, they have bugs too. They have some bad bugs, actually. And they don't offer bounties for them. And they don't really fix their stuff either. Not many of the botnet creators do regression testing. So even if you do actually, put a note in their forum that they have a bug, they don't really go back and fix it. About 80% of the ones I tested didn't do input validation. So I thought it was odd that when you're exploiting a bug about bad input validation, that you yourself in your application would not put in input validation. But it goes back to my idea that it is easier to point out flaws than it is to fix them yourself. So let's go small. JavaScript. Most websites today are running Ajax. So if a client was presented to your website and didn't have JavaScript enabled, why are we letting them through? Why are we presenting them the no script tag? I get in 1995 when it was invented that was cool and we needed some sort of way to bridge, right? It's 2015. People really should be stopped using IE3. We really should just let it go. Or if we have to, send them a no-op, send them some sort of way to validate that they actually are a human, not a bot, and then let them through. But if they don't have JavaScript, they can't use your application, they're not going to be able to buy whatever widget you're selling. And that's the whole point of being here, right, is we need to make money. So why are we wasting resources on people who we can never make money off of? The last one here is something that we always had fun with is you can send your own beef to the client. If you have a client that doesn't match your spec and you presume that it may be someone with malicious intent, why not send them some exploit framework or whatever junk you want to send them? The idea is that their intentions may not be the best because they can't even operate your application if they're so woefully behind. All right, that was small. So what if we could identify what our attacker is using? What if we could identify exactly the piece of software they were using and we could craft an exploit, or we had a bank of exploits ready to go for that, and then we could send that to them? You know what this sounds like? I mean, we're identifying a target, and we're probably have the perfect exploit for it, and we're delivering it to them. And I started thinking about this, and I'm like, well, that's great, but how would we get down to figuring out who our attackers are and what they're using? Well, unfortunately, what I found out was that most of our attackers don't bother to change their user agents. In fact, they walk into the room and they scream out their name. And even the tools I found that had options to change their user agents, most of the people running them did not. I had boxes set up for over 3 months, and I went cold through it, and you wouldn't know how many people left the default SQL map user agent in there. So now I know that a pretty good idea that our enemies aren't changing their stuff up. They're really not trying to hide themselves. So where can I go with this? It is entirely easier to enumerate all that's good in the world than to try to count everything that's bad. It is extremely easy to find all the valid user agents. There's a website. There's 2, actually. It's extremely hard to enumerate all the bad user agents out there because I really don't care. If they are something that I have a small list of clients that could use my application, why wouldn't I want to go and start typing out everything bad in the world? I'm lazy. I would rather take that small list there and say, all right, these are the clients that can use my app. Everything else I consider to be a threat. And we can go on our varying degrees of threats based on what their capabilities are, but I can truthfully say that this small group right here are our legitimate users. The rest are threats. So what can we do if we can deliver our application to a valid user agent, but what do we do with the unknowns? We could drop connections for the invalid ones. Just cut them off. We have access to layer 7. We have a scripting engine, so we can say, hey, if your user agent isn't in this list, just drop. Better, let's send out an exploit to ones that we know that we have exploits for. Okay, next one. You've identified an agent. You want to know if that actually does input validation. So why don't we send back a pretty large header, see what happens. I found out Apache limits you to about 8K for the server name. The HTTP spec actually has no limits on how big that field can be. That was the largest I found, and I thought it was kind of interesting, so I started sending out 10, 12, 14K server headers, and I watched a lot of these tools die. I first ran this talk as kind of a prep at CactusCon in Arizona. Literally within an hour after my talk, one of the tool makers updated his code to patch against this. I guess he was a fan. So what happens when this what are we doing here? We're identifying our threat. We're going after it. We're testing the waters. I mean, just as we test other applications, let's flip it around and think of the client as an application. Run through the same pen test, the drunk monkey test we do on applications with them. Send them back garbage, because why not? Least of what they're going to do. Are they going to complain that your website crashed their tool that they were trying to take over and pwn you? All right, so now we're getting somewhere. Automated scripts are kind of fun. In doing this, I made sure to put up a bunch of vanilla WordPress installs just to see what happens, just to see how many times a day I get hit with WP Scan and all these other tools. And I found they are quite an interesting bunch. Some of them actually gave me a link to go retrieve the application in their user agent. I thought that was quite nice. I don't know if it was a misconfiguration, but it allowed me to actually get the code and review it. But I started thinking, wouldn't it be nice just to tie up their time so that they're not going out and hurting someone else? I mean, I've got free cycles, and all they're doing is scanning. They're not actually trying to do anything. So I like creating 1 terabyte reports for these people to read. So I got an idea. Let's inspect all of our 404 responses. If it matches a known URI from a CMS, let's just return 200. Right? Now we've got the ultimate Drupal WordPress Joomla box. Running IIS, gold, 98. The 404 check just ensured that we don't capture our own application. Because remember, we're looking at the responses coming back from the web server, so that we're in the middle. We get the response back from the web server. We know what the code is. So if it's 404 and it matches a URI from CMS, let's go ahead and send it right on through. Well, what I found was, first I'm like, well, where do I get links to CMS URIs? Cyclist has them. Somebody has diligently gone through and cultivated all the URIs for all the major CMSs out there. I don't know why you'd want this other than do something like this, but it was really handy when I was doing this. We can also extract them from the tools. CMS Explorer, WP Scan, CMS Map, they all have the URIs built into them. You can extract them with grep, and they're right there for you. So what did I find out? Some of the tools actually check the size of the reply. It was painfully obvious with one of them that they used the reply to actually gain more intelligence about what's going on. So if they got a zero-size reply, they said thanks, goodbye, and they quit on you. So I actually had to feed them a reply, and since I don't actually have the CMS running, I'm like, well, what does that reply look like? So I actually had to craft up a longer set of scripts to feed back the sample data from all these CMSs, because they all give it to you, right? When you do a default install, they have a database file with all the sample data in there. You just have to match up what that data is to what they're requesting and what they're looking for. So you can't just throw it to 100 and have it come on happily. Like I said, a certain tool had an update. Like right after I gave this talk, you can say that I participated in his building a better mousetrap because I was a perfect mouse. The interesting thing I found though is some tools actually read in the HTML and grep the information from it. So I'm going to let that resonate from you. They read in our supplied input, grep from it, and then use it for something else. And I find it totally funny because one of these scanners was actually looking for SQL injection vulnerabilities, and yet took that value that I gave them and injected it right into a database call. So what can we do? They're taking arbitrary user supplied information and then doing something with it. Sounds like a vector to me. You see, we have this idea that this malicious programs are written by guys who are really smart. I'm thinking they're just cousins to the guys who are writing enterprise code, and they all have the same bugs. These are just going out and finding them, but we haven't solved the problem, right? So in this scenario, what could we do with this, right? If we can identify a certain tool, we know that it's just going to take the information we have, and at some point in that information is going to grep out a piece, and then you go pack it on the back of a SQLite statement. What can we do? Well, let's go ahead and we'll check for our 404s. If the URI matches our own CMS, we'll return 200. We'll return the content. Bonus points if we can actually, get them to break. They assuming correctly that the CMS they're looking at is actually one working, but two is stable, is viable, is actually run correctly. They're not realizing that what they're attacking is us in our weaponized ADC. So some of the things we did, command injection on the client side was always a fun one. I actually got this one to pull off, in which we started pinging ourselves back. Think shell shock. All this from a page they were running across when they were blindly scanning me. So if you can imagine the look on their face when they're throwing off the scanner, blindly scanning, and then their machine just starts churning out and doing other stuff. Arbitrary reading files was interesting. Information exfiltration was one I got to work on with one script, and it was getting it to make curl requests to a box that I had and literally tack on the contents of the file at the end of the URI. And so I just go through my logs, and there they all are. I'm sure you guys could go farther with this than I ever did in playing with it, but it was the idea that all I'm doing is the same attack they're trying to pull off of me back to them through their client. So we now can waste our time and resources. We can execute code, our code on their server. We can get them to give up information about themselves and to hide, or to, not hide, but to give up that element of surprise. So, it's out of place. What else can we do? We can do geofencing. Anyone know what geofencing is? Okay, so most ADCs have a GeoIP database in them, or a capability to add that on. The idea is that if your customer base can't do business with you from a certain country, you really shouldn't expose yourself to them. If your product isn't sold in China, there's no way you can make any money selling to the people of China. So being available to them only opens up your threat landscape and does nothing, doesn't bring any value into the company. Now, I know a couple marketing people in the back raising their hand, but marketing we need to market to them because some businessmen can be on vacation in China and need to buy our product. Is it worth it? We go back to the question of value. Is that exposure worth the price of being left vulnerable? You need to preserve your resources for those people who can actually buy your product because they're the ones who make your money. They're the ones who keep your lights on. So having an idea of where your customer base is located and only being available to them. I mean, it's pretty simple in the ADC. We have an ability to look, take their IP, run it against the GeoIP database. Now, some people will say, well, you know, the GeoIP database can be wrong sometimes. What's your margin of error? What are you willing to expose yourself for that 1-2% chance that maybe you get some legitimate customer who then only had an 8% chance of actually buying something? To me, that's minimal compared to the cost of a breach or the cost of leaving yourself open. Sometimes it does take getting the math book out and showing them that problem, because people think just in sales, they assume that 100% of people buying or going to your website are buying your product 100% of the time. And we know that's not the case. So we're in a unique position right now. We are an authorized man in the middle. We have the ability to inspect. We can sit and we are trained against a set of inputs so that we can now look at what's going on and make some sort of decision. It can be pretty subtle. I mean, this doesn't have to be huge and be, you know, guns blazing. We don't have to fire off, and we don't have to do every single one of these techniques. We don't even need to do one of these techniques. But the idea is that if we start doing more to react back, we're going to see the attackers either A, get smarter, or B, leave, right? They'll move on to the next guy. The idea is akin to putting a sign outside your house that, you know, says you have a burglar alarm. Most burglars will walk past that and they won't even touch your house because they would rather go to the one that doesn't have the sign. It's an easier mark, right? If you can show that you have some teeth, you have some capability to react, and you have thought about it. Today, this was only, you know, preemptive defense. I can talk for hours about other ways of doing actualized attacks, but these are just subtle. Most of the time, these will get past, you know, most of your managers and management. They like the idea of being able to isolate and understand who that particular attacker is and focus there rather than the accidental customer getting swapped up in it. All right, now that I put everybody to sleep, any questions? I went on for 44 minutes and nobody has any questions. Do you have questions? Not one? Thank you. All right, guys, I'm out. Oh, yep. No problem. It's kind of interesting because I had this conversation after my last round of talks with a lawyer who was in the room. So it comes down to every lawyer I've talked to has a different spin on it. Because there is no case law, and that's what lawyers really live off of. They live off, you know, what's precedent, and there isn't. The best thing I can go back to is now we have testimony from our congressman saying that they back it. The U.S. Army has written a lot of good information on exactly how to pull this off and strategize it. So if you can always go back to what your own government's doing and use that as a basis of not necessarily your right to do it. I hate to say that word, the right is overused, but at least it's one of the tools you have in your bag. And then from there, again, you have to weigh all those, you know, things. It shouldn't be the first thing you go to. You know, your first response shouldn't be flipping the guns and just going full bore at it. But if everything lines up and you check off all the boxes, you know, make the smart move. Did I dance around that well? Yes, sir. So I have. One of the things I didn't put up here because I haven't been able to test it fully is not only throttling 200 responses, and what the gentleman asked was about, have I started throttling the 200 responses to try to throw out the scanners? I've tried that. I've also tried not giving the connect close, just to keep that socket open. I'm doing everything on an F5, so they have a dedicated network processor that can easily open and close TCP connections. So I'm not worried about exhausting sessions, because if I do fill up all my TCP sessions, I can quickly close the dead ones right away. I don't have to wait for close wait. It'll kill it right away. So I don't want to DOS myself. But what I have found is that the scripts most of them are so poorly written, they decided to write their own TCP clients rather than use the toolkits available to them. So they're not doing stuff like closing sockets. And the worst part is they don't care about malformed packets being returned to them. They don't care that I only sent them back a content but had a length of -1. It's kind of interesting to see the depth of which some of them are written really well. Some others are you don't even understand how they work. I mean, yes, sir. I'm hoping to drive it. I want to see the curriculum change. The problem we have right now is nobody wants to take responsibility for saying, yes, go hit that button. It's a lot easier to sit back and play the defensive role and to say, we're just going to observe and report and go patch our stuff and move on. But the way I feel is that we're not doing ourselves any good. We are the victim who are just going to be a victim again. We're not standing up and saying, hey, get off my lawn. We're just kind of sitting back and going, well, we took it on the nose. Let's go move. So I'm hoping that the curriculum changes, and it's already changed a lot this year from when we started doing this research 2 years ago. I mean, and even then, from 2 years beyond that, I mean, we are getting push. You've got a lot of people writing policy now to kind of framework around this. I mean, a lot of us have ideas, but none of us can write policy, right? And so the big people who do write them and they're coming up with good policies. It's not lame. It's taken a while to explain it to the smart people so that they can do what they need to do. Yes, sir. It's the same concept. I mean, yeah, potato, potato. Well, but see, that is part of active defense. Remember, we have the 4 pillars in there from 4.1 to 4.4. This is just one of them. I mean, there is the, fire up your countermeasures and go straight after them. And that is if you get to that point. The last talk I gave 2 years ago, we walked through exactly that, and we had some scenarios where we had one instance where we found a guy and we decided to make a call to him and spook him and say, what the hell? Because again, it was a situation where we went through our recon, we were able to recon better than he was able to recon, and we wound up putting a face to an action, have all the information there to hand it over to LEO, and they took care of the rest. But that was out of the ordinary, right? Most IR plans stop right there. You call up your industry-leading security experts, they come out, you pay a lot of money, they hand you a report, and you spend the next 6 months patching your systems. And then you forget about it, you move on. There's never that message that gets sent out that, really don't do this again. And a lot of people get repeat attacks happening because they know that there's going to be no response. If I was an enemy actor and I understood that there would be no response, there couldn't be a response. If I knew that your company policy was that you did not respond, where do you think I'm going to target? Anything else? All right.